She had everything: a penthouse, a company worth millions, and a reputation that made grown men nervous in boardrooms. He had almost nothing: a suitcase, a 6-year-old daughter, and one night to find somewhere to sleep in a city that didn't know his name. When fate jammed them under the same roof, everyone expected disaster. What nobody expected was what happened next. She hadn't let anyone close in 4 years. He wasn't trying to get close, he was just trying to survive. But sometimes the walls we build to keep the world out are the same walls that trap us inside. This is a story about what happens when the wrong person walks through the right door at exactly the wrong moment. If this story already has you, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The rain came down sideways that Tuesday night, the kind that made Portland feel less like a city and more like a bad decision someone made a long time ago and never corrected. Logan Carter stood on the curb outside what was supposed to be his new apartment building with his daughter Maisie pressed against his side, her small hand wrapped around 2 of his fingers the way she'd done since she was a baby. She was 6 years old and had her mother's eyes, wide and brown and capable of cutting right through him. And she was currently staring up at the yellow police tape stretched across the lobby entrance like it was a school science experiment she hadn't been told about. "Daddy," she said, "I see it." "Why is there tape?" "Because something happened to the building." "What happened?" Logan didn't answer right away because he was reading the notice posted on the front door glass, water streaming down over the official city seal and the words structural failure, uninhabitable, occupancy prohibited, and trying to calculate in his head whether this was something that could be fixed by morning. The calculation took about 4 seconds. The answer was no. "There was water damage on," he said. "The floors aren't safe. Our stuff is in there." "I know. My backpack is in there, with Mr. Hopscotch." Mr. Hopscotch was a stuffed rabbit that had been through 3 moves, a cross-country road trip, and the worst year of both their lives. He was not replaceable. Logan crouched down to Maisie's level, which meant he was now kneeling on wet concrete in his good work pants, rain hitting the back of his neck. "We're going to get Mr. Hopscotch back," he said. "I promise. Not tonight, but soon." Maisie looked at him with an expression that was too old for her face. Kids who'd been through upheaval developed that look early, a kind of patient skepticism, waiting to see if the adult was going to follow through this time. It made Logan's chest hurt every time he saw it. "Okay," she said, "just that." "Okay." He stood up, pulled out his phone, and called his new manager at the design firm, Hartwell and Associates, the reason they were in Portland in the first place. 3 rings. Voicemail. He called the relocation coordinator the company had assigned him. Voicemail. He called the building's property management number posted on the notice. A recording told him their offices were closed and to call back during business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It was Tuesday at 7:43 in the evening. He stood there for a moment with his phone in his hand, rain gathering in the collar of his jacket, Maisie leaning into him, and thought very clearly, "I have made a significant error in judgment somewhere along the line." The promotion had seemed straightforward 3 months ago. Senior designer at Hartwell's Portland office, a title jump, a salary jump, a fresh start in a city that wasn't soaked in old grief. He and Maisie had driven up from Sacramento with everything they owned, most of which was now sitting on the other side of yellow police tape. The apartment had been arranged through the relocation package. He hadn't thought to verify it. He hadn't thought to have a backup. He hadn't thought about a lot of things. "Are we sleeping in the car?" Maisie asked. "No." "We slept in the car that one time, in Nevada." "That was different. That was an adventure." "You said it was an adventure. I said it was uncomfortable." "You were 4. I still remember." Logan opened his relocation packet on his phone, a PDF he'd barely looked at because he'd been focused on the logistics of the move itself, and started scrolling through the emergency housing contacts. There were 3. The first was a corporate extended stay hotel that, when he called, told him they had a room available for $460 a night with a 2-night minimum. The second was a property management company that handled furnished short-term rentals. The woman who answered said the earliest available was in 2 weeks. The third was a line item he almost skipped because it was listed under partner accommodations, short-term subletting, which sounded bureaucratic and vague. The name on the line was Sterling Residential Properties. Contact M. Aldridge, property manager. He called the number. It rang 5 times, and he was already composing a voicemail in his head when someone picked up. A man, older, slightly out of breath, like he'd crossed a room fast to get to the phone. Aldridge. Hi. Yes. My name is Logan Carter. I'm a new hire at Hartwell & Associates. I just arrived in Portland tonight, and the apartment I was assigned through the relocation package has been condemned. I'm looking at the emergency housing contacts in my packet, and your listing came up. I have a 6-year-old daughter with me. I'm fairly desperate. There was a pause. He heard papers shuffling. Hartwell, you said? Yes. Logan Carter, senior designer, started officially yesterday. How long do you need? I don't know, until I can find something permanent. Weeks, maybe? I can pay. I'm not asking for charity. I just need somewhere. It's a room in a private penthouse, Aldridge said. Full floor. You'd have a bedroom and a bathroom, shared common areas. The owner has specific rules about the space. I need to make a call first. Of course. Give me 20 minutes. Logan hung up. He looked at Maisie. She had found a dry spot under the building's narrow awning and was sitting on her rolling suitcase with her knees pulled up, watching the rain. Are we okay? She asked. Working on it, he said. Aldridge called back in 14 minutes. She agreed, he said, with a tone that suggested this had been a harder negotiation than Logan might expect. But I need to be clear with you about some things before you go up there. Okay. The owner is a private person. She works from home frequently. She has rules about the space, no guests without notice, no noise after 9:30, no entering the home office under any circumstances ever. She will tell you herself when you arrive, but I want you prepared. That all sounds completely reasonable. Aldridge paused in a way that felt deliberate. She can be difficult to read. Don't take it personally. Most people do. Logan didn't know what that meant, and he didn't have the luxury of asking. He had the address, a building in the Pearl District, 23rd floor penthouse, and a daughter who needed to be inside and fed and horizontal within the next hour. Thank you, he said. Really? Don't thank me yet, Aldridge said, and hung up. The building was the kind that made you feel slightly underdressed just walking through the lobby. All glass and polished concrete, a doorman who looked at Logan's wet jacket and rolling suitcase with a carefully neutral expression, an elevator with walls made of something that might have been actual brushed copper. Maisie pressed her palm flat against it and looked at her reflection, distorted and golden. Fancy, she said. Don't touch things, Logan said automatically. I'm already touching it. Stop touching it. She pulled her hand back and wiped it on her pants. The elevator stopped at the 23rd floor, the only floor it stopped at, which meant the entire floor was one unit, and the doors opened directly into a small private entry hall. Marble floors. A console table with an architectural vase holding a single branch of something that was either extremely expensive or extremely artificial. A door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, warm light coming through the gap. Logan knocked on the door frame. Silence for a moment. Then footsteps. Quick, confident, the sound of someone who moved through their own space without hesitation. The door opened. His first impression was contradictory. She was composed in the way that people who've had to work hard at composure are composed, not effortlessly, but deliberately. She was wearing dark trousers and a structured blouse, which was either how she always dressed at home or how she'd decided to present herself for this moment. She was holding a glass of water with both hands like she needed something to do with them. She was younger than he'd expected, late 20s or early 30s maybe, and her dark hair was pulled forward across the left side of her face in a way that looked habitual rather than styled. And then his eye traveled briefly and involuntarily, and he understood what Aldridge had been trying to prepare him for. The scar ran from her left temple down across her cheekbone, not subtle, not faded with time into something easy to overlook. It was the kind of mark that told a story of impact and force, the way skin healed when it had been seriously damaged. It wasn't grotesque, It wasn't what you'd call disfiguring in any dramatic movie sense, but it was there, unmistakably, and it was the kind of thing that most people reacted to whether they intended to or not. Logan's reaction lasted approximately 1.5 seconds, and then he was looking at her eyes, which were gray and direct, and already watching him with an expression he recognized. Waiting for the thing people usually did, so she could catalog it and decide how to proceed. He didn't do the thing. He wasn't performing. He just didn't, because it didn't seem like the relevant information right now. The relevant information was that he was soaking wet, his daughter was exhausted, and this woman had agreed to let strangers into her home on 48 hours' notice. "Victoria Sterling?" he said. "Yes." "Logan Carter. This is Maisie." He put his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We appreciate this more than I can say. I know it's an imposition." Victoria looked at Maisie. Something shifted slightly in her face. Not quite softening, more like recalibrating. Kids, apparently, had not been part of her expectation. "Aldridge said there was a child," she said. "I wasn't picturing—" She stopped. 6 years old, Logan said. "She's quiet, well-behaved. She won't be a problem." "I'm not a problem," Maisie confirmed. Victoria looked at the small girl standing in her entry hall with rain-damp hair and a very serious expression on her face, and something complicated moved through her eyes that she shut down quickly. "Come in," she said. "I'll show you the room." The penthouse was large in a way that felt more functional than ostentatious. Open-plan living and kitchen, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city lights blurred by rain, walls that were a warm off-white covered with architectural prints, and framed photographs of buildings Logan recognized. Good taste, very specifically deployed, the kind of space that a person had thought hard about and then made their own. He noticed, as Victoria led them through, that she kept her left side angled slightly away from him. Not dramatically, not enough that someone would necessarily clock it as intentional. But he noticed. He'd spent a decade as an interior designer, which meant he'd spent a decade training himself to observe spatial relationships and the way people occupied their environments. She moved through her own space in a particular way, always keeping certain sight lines in mind. The guest bedroom was at the end of a hallway, past what was clearly the closed door of her home office, and another closed door that he guessed was her bedroom. The guest room was larger than he'd expected. A queen bed, a proper closet, a window seat, an attached bathroom, clean, actually thoughtfully prepared, even down to fresh towels folded on the bed. "There are extra blankets in the closet," Victoria said from the doorway. "If the bed is too soft, there's a firmness dial on the side of the mattress. Wi-Fi password is on the card on the nightstand. The kitchen is shared. There's a section in the fridge with tape that has my name on it. I'd appreciate if you kept to your own shelf. There are also—" She glanced at Maisie, who was standing in the center of the room, turning slowly in a circle, apparently conducting a personal assessment. "Rules about the office. The door is always closed. You don't open it for any reason, including if you think you're being helpful. Understood?" "Understood," Logan said. "I work from home frequently. I keep odd hours. I don't expect you to accommodate my schedule, but I'd appreciate basic quiet after 9:30. "Of course." She was ticking through items like a checklist, and he had the sense this wasn't how she usually spoke to people. That she was performing a kind of careful landlord professionalism to keep the interaction on business-like rails. It was almost impressive. "How long?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't know. A few weeks minimum while I find something permanent. I'll try to make it as short as possible." Aldridge mentioned Hartwell. "Yes. I started this week, senior designer. The company arranged the apartment through their relocation package. It apparently didn't occur to anyone to check whether the building was structurally sound." A small muscle at the corner of her mouth moved, which might have been an almost smile. "Portland's rental market makes people careless," she said. "I'll have Aldridge draw up a short-term lease tomorrow. Month to month, standard terms. Whatever works for you." She looked at Maisie again, who had found the window seat and was now kneeling on it with her nose almost pressed to the glass, watching the rain hit the city. "There's a school 3 blocks from here," Victoria said, and then seemed slightly surprised she'd said it. "Riverton Elementary. It's good. I noticed it because I walk past it sometimes." Thanks, Logan said. That's actually useful. Another silence. Victoria pulled her hair forward slightly on the left side, just a fraction, automatic, like a reflex she was no longer fully aware of. I should let you settle in, she said. There's food in the kitchen if she's hungry. Not much, but there's bread and eggs and some soup in the cabinet, I think. You don't have to. I'm not doing it out of hospitality, she said plainly. I'm doing it because she looks hungry, and a hungry child in my apartment at 9 o'clock would be difficult to ignore. She turned and walked back down the hallway before he could respond. He fed Maisie eggs and toast at Victoria's kitchen counter, which felt surreal in the way that all emergency situations feel surreal once the immediate adrenaline wears off. His daughter ate with the focused dedication of a small person who had decided not to comment on the strangeness of the evening, and Logan appreciated that more than he could say. Victoria did not reappear. The light under her office door stayed on. She has a hurt face, Maisie said, around a bite of toast. Maisie? I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying she has one. People have all kinds of things happen to them, Logan said carefully. It's not something we discuss. I didn't discuss it. I just said it to you. Don't say it to her. Maisie considered this. Why does she keep her hair over it like that? Because it makes her feel better. Does it? I don't know. Maybe. If something happened to my face, Maisie said, would you still think I was pretty? The question hit him somewhere low in his chest. He put down his fork and looked at his daughter, her egg yolk-stained mouth, her perpetually tangled hair, her complete and earnest seriousness. You know what I think about you, he said. She rolled her eyes, which was a very recent development he found both annoying and oddly charming. You have to say that. You're my dad. No, I don't. Plenty of dads don't say it. I say it because it's true. She seemed to accept this. She ate the last of her toast. I like the window, she said. You can see all the lights from here. You can. Can we stay for a while? We'll see. Logan lay awake that first night, listening to the rain in the silence of someone else's apartment, which was a specific kind of quiet, full of other people's habits and routines, the particular hum of a refrigerator he didn't know, the distant sound of traffic in a city that was new to him. He thought about what the next month needed to look like. Find a permanent apartment, get Maisie enrolled in school, learn the city, learn the office, stop being the new person who didn't know where anything was. He'd done this before, built a life from scratch in a new place, but last time he'd had a partner helping him carry the weight of it, and now he was carrying it alone. Elena had left 2 years ago. Not dramatically. No affair, no explosion, just a long and honest conversation one evening in Sacramento about the fact that she didn't love him anymore, hadn't for a while, and staying for Maisie's sake wasn't something either of them wanted to model for their daughter. He'd understood even. He'd understood in the way you understand something that still breaks you open anyway. Custody was shared, but Maisie had wanted to stay with Logan when the Portland offer came, and Elena had agreed, and now here they were, a single father and his daughter in a stranger's penthouse in the rain. He was 32 years old, and he had no idea what he was doing. He suspected that was normal, but it didn't feel normal. It felt like a failure of preparation. Down the hall, the light under the office door went off at 2 in the morning. Awesome. The first week was mostly coexistence. They moved around each other in the kitchen in the mornings with the careful politeness of people who were aware they were in each other's space without exactly wanting to be. Victoria made coffee with an elaborate pour-over setup and did not offer him any, which he found funny in a way he didn't express. He used the automatic machine on the counter. Maisie ate cereal. The three of them developed an unspoken traffic pattern around the kitchen island that became routine before any of them had decided to make it routine. He enrolled Maisie at Riverton Elementary on Thursday. She walked in on the first day with her backpack. They'd retrieved it and Mr. Hopscotch from the condemned building by then, through a brief and irritating process involving a building inspector and a lot of paperwork, and turned at the door to look at him with that old-face expression. "It'll be fine," he said. "I know," she said. "I always make at least one friend. I have a system." He drove to the Hartwell office trying not to think about the fact that his 6-year-old had a system for making friends in new schools because she'd had to use it before. Work was good, at least. The Portland office was smaller than Sacramento, but ambitious. They had 3 major projects in development, including a full commercial renovation of a historic building in the Pearl District, which was the kind of work Logan had relocated for. His manager, a compact, fast-moving woman named Dana Okafor, had the style of someone who'd been burned by nice people before and now only trusted professionals. "You're going to like Portland," she told him on his second day, handing him a project file without preamble. "The city's impossible to work around. The contractors all hate each other, and the weather will make you want to cry. But the design culture is genuinely interesting. People here actually care about spaces." "That's why I came," he said. "That's what everyone says." She didn't sound cynical about it, just accurate. "The Reed project is yours to lead. Historic renovation, ground floor commercial, 3 residential floors above. The building's been empty for 8 years. Ownership group wants it done in 14 months. That's aggressive. Everything in this city is aggressive. Get used to it." By the end of the first week, he'd learned 3 things about Victoria Sterling. The first was that she was extremely good at her job. He'd looked up Sterling creative branding after the first night. He'd been curious, the way you're curious about someone who's let you into their home. And what he found was genuinely impressive. She'd founded the company 5 years ago, grown it from a 2-person operation to a 27-person agency with clients in tech, architecture, fashion, and food. She'd been profiled in 2 industry publications. The photographs in the profiles were carefully shot from a particular angle, consistently, and he'd recognized that choice too. The second thing was that she worked constantly. Not in the way people say they work constantly and mean they're busy. She was in her office by 7 every morning and rarely emerged before 7 at night, except to get coffee and occasionally to eat something standing at the kitchen counter while reading from her phone. She ate alone. She ate fast. She treated meals as logistical problems to be solved rather than things to be experienced. The third thing was that she was lonely in a way she had completely convinced herself she was not. He noticed it in small things. The way she paused sometimes when Maisie was in the living room doing homework, as if the sound of a child's presence in the space was something she was consciously adjusting to. The way she'd bought an extra box of cereal, the exact brand Maisie had been eating, and put it in the cabinet without mentioning it. The way her apartment, for all its expensive thoughtfulness, had no photographs of people in it. Buildings, yes. Cities, yes. But no people. He didn't comment on any of it. He'd learned from watching that commenting was not what Victoria Sterling wanted or responded to. What she seemed to want was to be treated normally, which was a thing so few people apparently did around her that she'd stopped expecting it. The first real conversation happened on a Friday evening, unexpectedly, the way first real conversations usually do. He was at the kitchen table with project files spread out in front of him, architectural sketches, material samples, contractor estimates, when Victoria came out of the office and stopped short at the sight of him. "I thought you'd be gone," she said. "Maisie's at a school friend's for dinner. First social engagement in Portland, so I gave her the full 2 hours." Victoria looked at the files on the table. He watched her try not to be interested and fail. "Reed Building?" she said. He blinked. "You know it?" "Everyone in the Pearl knows it. It's been sitting empty since the Mander Group went under. The ownership changes hands and nothing happens. Which firm?" "Hartwell." Something moved across her face. "They're actually going to do it?" "That's the plan. I'm leading the renovation." She came a few steps closer, which was more proximity than she'd voluntarily maintained since he'd arrived, and looked at the sketches on the table. Not at him. At the sketches. "The street-level retail concept is wrong," she said. He looked up. "Excuse me?" "The Reed Building has 3 original arched entrances on the ground floor. Whatever that sketch is showing, those are flush front glass panels that are going to erase them. You'll lose the entire architectural identity of the building the moment someone stands at street level." Logan looked at the sketch. She was right. He'd had the same reservation and hadn't fully articulated it yet to himself, let alone the client. "That sketch is the ownership group's preference," he said. "Then your job is to change their preference." But she said it simply, like it was obvious. The building's value isn't just in the square footage. It's in what it is. If you strip the identity to put in generic retail glass, you've got a cheaper building and an expensive skin. I know that. Then say it. He looked at her for a moment. She was looking at the sketch, not at him, and she'd moved to about 4 feet from the table, which put her in the light from the window, and he could see the scar clearly, could see the texture of it, the particular path it took down her cheek. And she was completely unguarded in that moment because she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about a building she'd apparently been watching for years. You have a background in architecture? He asked. No, I have a background in visual identity, which is what architecture fundamentally is, at scale. She straightened up, and the shift in posture brought the guard back. She'd noticed she'd been speaking freely. I'll let you work. You don't have to go. She paused. I mean, if you want to look at the materials, you're welcome to. You already found the main problem with the street-level concept. I wouldn't mind a second set of eyes. It was a careful offer, framed as utility rather than company. He saw her process it, weighing whatever it cost her against whatever it might offer. I have calls in the morning, she said. It's 8 o'clock on a Friday. Another pause. Then she went to the kitchen counter and refilled her coffee and came back and sat across the table from him, not close, leaving the full width of the table between them, and looked at the files. What's the residential concept? She asked. He told her. They talked for 2 hours. Not about anything personal, about the building, about the neighborhood, about what the Pearl District needed in terms of commercial ground floor activations, about materials and budget, and the gap between what ownership wanted and what the space deserved. She was precise, and she was fast, and she had opinions that were grounded in actual knowledge, not just aesthetics, and she didn't soften them to make him feel good about his preliminary work. When his phone buzzed with a text from the friend's parent, Maisie ready whenever you are. He looked up and realized it was past 10 o'clock. I have to go pick up Maisie, he said. Victoria was already standing, already creating distance, already returning to the version of herself she showed the world. Of course. This was actually helpful, he said. The street-level thing. I'm going to push back on the glass panels Monday. You should. Thank you. She picked up her mug. I was just... She stopped. Yeah, he said. He didn't finish her sentence for her. Good night, Victoria. She nodded once, precise and contained. Good night. He brought Maisie home to the penthouse at 10:30, and she was half asleep and told him in fragments about her new friend Petra, who had a hamster named Doorstop, and let Maisie hold it, and this had apparently cemented the friendship irreparably. He got her into pajamas and into bed, and stood in the doorway of the room for a moment, watching her settle, and thought about how much of parenting was just being present, just being the person who was there, consistently, even when you didn't know what you were doing. Down the hall, the light under Victoria's office door was off, which meant she'd gone to bed before 10:30, which was, now that he thought about it, the first time that had happened since they'd arrived. He didn't know what to make of that. He went to bed. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and Portland was doing what it sometimes did, going quiet and clean and cold, the city settling under a clear black sky. It wasn't what he'd planned. None of this was what he'd planned. But Maisie had a friend with a hamster named Doorstop, and he'd found the flaw in the Reed Building street-level design. And someone had bought extra cereal without being asked, and the rain had stopped. For now, that was enough to work with. The second week arrived with clearer skies and a new variable. Victoria, who had apparently decided, but without announcing it or discussing it, that occasional proximity to other human beings was acceptable under specific conditions. She started coming out of the office earlier in the evenings. Not for conversation. She'd sit at the far end of the living room with her laptop, ostensibly working, while Logan was at the kitchen table and Maisie was on the floor between them doing her reading homework. It wasn't togetherness. It was more like two separate activities happening in the same room, which is a thing that only feels comfortable when you're familiar enough with someone not to feel obligated to fill the silence. Maisie was the one who broke that particular rule because she was 6, and the concept of socially acceptable silence was not yet something she'd fully internalized. Victoria, she said one evening, not looking up from her book. Logan tensed slightly. What? Victoria said, in the flat way she had of answering questions she wasn't sure she wanted to engage with. Do you like dogs? A pause. Why? Petra has a hamster. I've been thinking about pets. My dad says not yet because we moved too much, but I was wondering generally what you thought about dogs. I've never had one, Victoria said. Were you sad about that? Maisie, Logan started. I'm asking a normal question, Maisie said with great dignity. It's a normal question about pets. Victoria was quiet for a moment. No, she said finally. I wasn't sad about it. I didn't think about it much. That's kind of sad on its own, Maisie said, with the merciless compassion of a child who doesn't know she's being merciless. Something happened in Victoria's expression that wasn't quite amusement but was in the same general neighborhood. Go back to your book, Logan told his daughter. Maisie went back to her book, but she was smiling in the way she smiled when she thought she'd made a good point, and Logan looked across the room at Victoria, who had gone back to her laptop with a carefully neutral expression that was doing a poor job of concealing the fact that she was, unexpectedly and against her clear preference, slightly charmed. He looked back at his files. Neither of them said anything. Outside, Portland was finally, reluctantly, beginning to feel like somewhere he could learn to know. 3 weeks in, Logan stopped counting the days. Not because things were going smoothly, they weren't exactly, but because at some point the mental calendar he'd been keeping, the one that said temporary, this is temporary, you'll be gone in 3 weeks, had quietly stopped updating itself. He'd looked at 2 apartments. One had a mold problem the landlord described as minor character. The other was technically within his budget if he ate nothing but rice for 6 months, and Maisie stopped needing things like shoes. He'd told the leasing agent he'd be in touch, which was the polite way of saying he wouldn't be. He was still at the penthouse. He had stopped noticing the brushed copper elevator. What he had started noticing was the way Victoria Sterling moved through her own life like she was a guest in it. It wasn't obvious. She ran a company, 27 employees, active client roster, a reputation in the industry that she'd clearly built from something real. When she was on calls in her office, he sometimes caught fragments through the closed door, her voice precise and authoritative, no hesitation, no softness. She knew what she was doing, and she knew that she knew. That version of Victoria Sterling was someone who had built something worth building, but the apartment version was different. The apartment version ate standing at the counter, went 3 days without going outside, sometimes 4, had a habit of positioning herself in rooms so that her left side faced walls rather than people, and when Logan first noticed it, he thought it might be accidental, and then he noticed it enough times that he knew it wasn't. She'd mapped every room of her own home according to which angles were safe. He didn't say anything about it. He also didn't pretend not to see it, which seemed to be what most people in her life did, either staring or carefully looking away. He just let it exist without making it a thing. And after a while, he thought she'd noticed that because something shifted, fractionally, in how she occupied the same spaces as him. The shift was small. She started leaving her office door cracked instead of closed. She made a full pot of coffee in the mornings instead of 1 cup. And if Logan took a mug from the second pour, he could tell she noticed, but she never said anything. Small calibrations. The kind that happen when someone is testing the temperature of a room before they commit to walking into it. Maisie, who had no patience for gradual, accelerated the whole process on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week by coming home from school and walking directly to where Victoria was sitting at the kitchen counter and placing a piece of paper in front of her. "It's for you," Maisie said. Victoria looked down at it. It was a drawing, crayon on construction paper, clearly done during some kind of school art period. 2 figures stood in front of what was recognizably, in a 6-year-old's interpretation, a building with a lot of windows. A tall woman with dark hair and a smaller figure next to her. The small figure was holding something. "That's you," Maisie said, pointing to the tall one. "And that's me. I'm giving you Mr. Hopscotch to hold because I thought maybe you'd want company while you work." Logan was standing in the kitchen doorway with a bag of groceries, and he stopped there because he was genuinely afraid of what was about to happen. Victoria had a very specific response to anything that crossed into personal territory. A withdrawal, quick and complete, like a door slamming. He'd seen it during their late-night conversation about the Reed building, when she'd caught herself being open and immediately reversed course. But Victoria was looking at the drawing, and she wasn't withdrawing. She was quiet for a long moment, Her hand moved and she touched the corner of the paper with one finger, just briefly. "Why Mr. Hopscotch?" she asked. "Because he's good at being there," Maisie said, with complete seriousness. "He doesn't need you to talk to him. He's just there." Victoria lifted her eyes to look at the girl in front of her, and Logan had a clear view of her face in that moment. The scar fully visible because she wasn't thinking about it, because she was thinking about what his daughter had just said to her. And her expression was something that didn't have a clean name. Not sadness exactly, not gratitude exactly. Something older than both. "Thank you, Maisie," she said, and her voice was quieter than usual and didn't have any of its usual walls in it. Maisie accepted this with a nod, picked up her backpack, and went to her room to presumably conduct her post-school decompression routine, which involved 15 minutes of absolute silence and then a sudden explosion of chatter at dinner. Logan stood in the doorway until Victoria looked up and noticed him. He held up the grocery bag. "I'm making pasta tonight," he said. "If you want some, there's enough." He wasn't sure what made him offer it. He'd bought extra without consciously deciding to. Victoria looked at him for a moment with an expression he was starting to learn, the one where she was calculating whether something was worth the exposure it required. "I have calls until 7, she said. "Pasta doesn't care what time it is." She picked up the drawing and held it for a second, and then, almost as if she was doing it before she could think better of it, she took it with her back to the office. Logan put the groceries away and didn't make anything of it. She came out at 7:15. Logan had timed the pasta optimistically, made a salad as a buffer, and was setting plates on the table when he heard her office door. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with her laptop bag still over her shoulder, which meant she'd been intending to just grab food and go back in. "Plates are on the table," he said without turning around. "You can eat in the office if you want. I'm not running a dining room here." A pause. Then he heard her put the laptop bag on the counter. She sat at the table. Maisie was already there, fork in hand, narrating something about Petra and a situation involving a substitute teacher and a lizard that had gotten loose in the classroom. And she absorbed Victoria's arrival into her monologue with the naturalness of a child who had decided that Victoria was just part of the household now and didn't require special adjustment. Logan sat down. For a few minutes, the table was just the sound of Maisie's story and forks and the particular comfortable quiet that happens when people are eating together without performing it. Victoria ate the whole bowl. She didn't say much, but she didn't leave either. The lizard, Maisie concluded, was named Gerald, but nobody knew that until the substitute looked it up on her phone, and by then Gerald was under the radiator and very calm about everything, which Petra says means he's been loose before and has a system. "That sounds like a recurring problem," Victoria said. "It's a recurring Gerald," Maisie agreed. Logan looked across the table at Victoria, who was pressing her lips together in the way people do when they don't want to smile but are failing at it. She caught him looking and her expression went neutral again, but not fast enough. "Good pasta," she said. "It's a very basic pasta," he said. "I know. I'm complimenting it anyway." Maisie looked between them with the focused interest of someone monitoring a developing situation and said nothing, which from her was an act of enormous discipline. The argument happened on a Sunday, which Logan would later think was fitting because Sundays had a way of stripping out the work-week armor and leaving everyone slightly more exposed than they meant to be. He'd been on a call with Donna about the Reed project, standing in the hallway talking through a contractor issue that had come up, when Victoria's office door opened and she came out carrying a coffee mug and stopped when she saw him, clearly having expected the apartment to be empty. She started to turn back, and Logan, still half focused on the call, reflexively said, "Hey, do you know anything about the Mander Group, the original owners of the Reed building?" She stopped. Something in her posture changed. "I have to call you back," Logan said to Dana, and hung up. "Sorry, I shouldn't have just—" "Why are you asking about the Mander Group?" Victoria said, and her voice was careful in a way that told him the name meant something. "They came up in the ownership history. I was trying to understand what happened to the building before the current group bought it." Victoria set down her mug with a precision that was a little too precise. The Mander Group was a development company run by two partners. They bought the Reed building in 2016, started a renovation, ran out of money, and folded in 2019. Standard story. "Did you work with them?" A pause. Their CEO was my boyfriend, she said, the flatness of it so complete that it took Logan a second to register what she'd actually said. At the time. Former, obviously. He thought about what Aldridge had said on the phone that first night. She can be difficult to read, most people do, and understood now that the careful manager speak had been navigating around exactly this. I'm sorry, Logan said. I didn't know. Why would you? She picked up her mug again. It's not relevant to the Reed project. The company folded, the building changed hands twice, and here we are. Victoria. It's genuinely fine, she said, in the voice people use when it is genuinely not. It was 4 years ago. He should have let it go. He almost did. Was it him? He asked. The accident. She went very still. I'm sorry, he said immediately. That's not my business. I don't know why I said that. She turned to look at him, and for once she wasn't managing the angle. Her full face was visible, the scar fully in the light, and she was looking at him with an expression that had dropped all its layers and was just raw and direct and a little dangerous. Yes, she said. It was his car. He was driving. He walked away without a scratch. A beat. And stayed with me for 14 months afterward, which he apparently felt was a sufficiently redemptive arc. The way she said it, the precision of 14 months, like she'd counted, told him more than anything else could have. Logan had spent enough time in the aftermath of a relationship ending to know what it looked like when someone had turned an injury into a verdict about their own worth. He'd done it himself, though for different reasons. There was a particular quality to how Victoria said he stayed, like she was still processing whether that had been kindness or just a different form of cruelty. He left because of the scar? Logan asked. He left because he realized that what he'd wanted was someone impressive who also needed him. And after the accident, I needed him too much, and wasn't as impressive. She said it with the flatness of someone who had analyzed the situation until the feeling went out of it. It didn't happen like that, obviously. It happened in 100 small ways over 14 months. But that was the architecture of it. That's a brutal way to talk about yourself. It's accurate. It's his version, Logan said. That's not the same thing. She looked at him sharply, like he'd said something unexpected. He held her gaze and didn't back off from it, and after a moment she looked away. Not shutting down exactly, more like she needed to be not looked at directly for a second. I have a call at noon, she said. Okay. She went back to the office. Logan stood in the hallway for a moment, replaying the last 5 minutes, feeling the specific weight of knowing you've pushed into territory you weren't invited into and aren't sure whether you did damage or not. She didn't avoid him after that, which was what he'd expected. She didn't bring it up again either, which he'd also expected. What he hadn't expected was that she started talking to him more, about work, mostly, about her clients and his projects, the kind of shop talk that fills space without requiring either person to be particularly vulnerable. But underneath it, something had changed. The conversation about the Mander Group had functioned like a door. Someone opens a crack to see if the hinges still work, and then they don't close it all the way again afterward. Victoria was brilliant in the specific way that people are brilliant when they've had to fight for every piece of ground they hold. She'd built Sterling Creative from nothing, which he learned in pieces. Her parents had money but hadn't given her any, had told her to prove it first and had kept moving the proof point, and she'd stopped trying to prove it to them around the time she landed her first major client and realized she didn't need their validation to run a company. She had a staff of 27 people who were apparently fiercely loyal, which Logan came to understand was because she was exact and demanding and paid them well and never ever asked them to pretend they were doing better than they were. How do you manage people you can't see in person? He asked her one night. They were both at the kitchen table. It had become a thing, the two of them working at opposite ends while Maisie slept, the apartment quiet around them. Most of my team has never met me in person, she said. The company's been largely remote since COVID. We meet on video. Camera on? A short pause. They can tell I prefer not to. Do you think that affects how they see you? I think it means they see me less, she said, and there was something honest and tired in it, which is what I found preferable. Even if it costs you something? She looked up from her laptop. What would it cost me? The parts of leadership that only happen in person, when someone can actually read you. People reading my face has not historically been a positive experience for me. Reading you for the scar, Logan said, versus reading you for what you're thinking. Those are different things. She was quiet for a moment, turning her stylus between her fingers the way she did when she was actually considering something rather than waiting to respond. My COO has worked for me for 3 years, she said. She has never seen my face. Does she know? She knows I had an accident. She's never asked for details. She doesn't seem to need them. That's someone who's decided you're worth working with based on who you are in the work, Logan said. That's your face, in the only way that matters at that level. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. You're unexpectedly philosophical for an interior designer. Interior design is mostly psychology with better lighting. She made the sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was getting closer. The moment that changed things happened on a Wednesday evening, unremarkably, the way most things that matter fail to announce themselves. Victoria had come home. She'd actually gone out, which was notable. She'd had a client dinner at a restaurant in the Pearl, had come back slightly tense in the way she was tense after sustained public exposure. And Maisie had been awake past her bedtime because she'd had a nightmare and couldn't get back to sleep. Logan had been sitting with her on the living room couch, and when Victoria walked in, Maisie looked up with her blanket pulled around her and said, "Victoria, I had a bad dream." Victoria stopped in the entryway, still in her coat. "What kind?" she asked. "The kind where you're at school, but it's not your school, and you don't know any of the rules." Victoria was quiet for a second. Then she crossed the room and sat in the armchair near the couch, still in her coat, like she hadn't fully committed to being there yet, and said, "I used to have that dream." Maisie looked at her. "You did?" "Frequently, after I started my company, for about 2 years." "What does it mean?" "I think it means you're worried about being in a place where you don't understand the rules well enough to do well." "That's exactly what it is," Maisie said, with the relief of someone who has been given language for a feeling. "You've moved a lot," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. 3 times in 4 years, Maisie said. "Dad's working on it." Logan, who was sitting at the other end of the couch and feeling the particular helplessness of a parent being gently indicted by their child, didn't argue. "Every new place has different rules," Victoria said, "but you already know the rule that matters most." "What rule?" "Be competent. If you're good at things, the rest tends to sort itself out." Maisie considered this. "Petra says to be nice to the librarian first." "That's also a good strategy," Victoria conceded, "but you need both." Maisie curled deeper into the blanket. "Tell me something about when you were little," she said, in the drowsy way that meant she was nearly out. Victoria glanced at Logan, who gave her nothing, just sat there, deliberately neutral. "When I was about your age," Victoria said after a moment, "I decided to redecorate my bedroom without asking permission. I moved all the furniture around and repainted one wall with my mother's craft paint. It took her a week to notice because she worked long hours. And when she finally noticed, she stood in the doorway and said," Victoria paused. "She said, 'Well, the placement is actually better.'" Maisie smiled, eyes already closed. "Did she help you finish it?" "No, but she didn't make me undo it." "That's still kind of nice." "Yes," Victoria said quietly. "It kind of was." Maisie was asleep in 3 minutes. Logan carried her to bed, and when he came back to the living room, Victoria was still in the armchair, still in her coat, staring at nothing in particular. He sat back on the couch. "You're good with her," he said. "She makes it easy." A beat. "She asks direct questions, and she accepts direct answers. Most adults can't do that." "She didn't get the directness from me," Logan said. "Her mother?" "Probably. Or it's just her. She's always been like that, since she could talk." He picked up his coffee from the table. "Elena and I split 2 years ago. Maisie took it the hardest out of all of us, which is what you'd expect, but she also recovered the fastest, which I didn't expect. She just processed it and then moved forward. I was still stuck on it long after she'd put it somewhere and was getting on with things." "Children are pragmatic," Victoria said. "They have to be. The world doesn't wait for them to finish grieving. Neither does it for adults," Logan said. She looked at him. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in the quiet for a little while, not filling it, just existing in the same room with the same understanding of what it cost to keep building a life after the architecture of it had changed. Outside, Portland had gone soft and dark, and the lights across the Pearl District were blurred and distant through the glass. Logan looked at Victoria, at her profile, the left side of her face, the scar visible and unhidden, and thought that she had no idea how differently she appeared when she wasn't trying to control how she appeared. The version of Victoria Sterling that existed when she forgot to manage herself was far more interesting and far more real than anything a carefully angled photograph could capture. He didn't say that. It wasn't the moment. "I should sleep," she said finally, standing. "Yeah." She took a few steps toward the hallway and stopped. "Logan." She didn't turn around. "Yeah?" "The Reed Building." A pause. "When you do the street-level reveal to the client, the arched entrance argument, lead with the financial upside, not the aesthetic one. Ownership groups in this city respond to cost per square foot per identity value. Give them the number first, then show them the beauty." He looked at the back of her head. "That's good advice." "I know," she said, and walked down the hallway, and her door closed quietly behind her. Logan sat in the living room for a while longer, his coffee going cold, thinking about the architecture of things. How the wall someone builds against the world can look impenetrable from the outside and be, from the inside, just a door that nobody's used in a long time. He wasn't trying to open anything. He was just living in the same space. But sometimes proximity alone does what nothing deliberate can. And he was aware, in the way you're aware of weather changing before the sky shows it, that something in the apartment had shifted from temporary arrangement into something that didn't have as clean a name. He didn't examine it too closely. He finished his coffee, rinsed the cup, and went to bed. In the morning, Victoria had left a second cup of pour-over on the counter with a sticky note that said, "Read client presentation. Start with slide 4, not slide 1. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he moved slide 4 to the front of the deck and went to work. The Reed client presentation went well, not perfectly. The ownership group had pushed back on the arched entrance concept for 40 minutes before the financial argument landed. But Logan had led with slide 4, exactly as Victoria had suggested, and the numbers had done what she said they would. By the end of the meeting, the group's lead partner had agreed to preserve all 3 original arched entrances and was already talking about them as a selling point, which was the thing Logan had wanted to say for 3 weeks, finally coming out of someone else's mouth. He told Victoria that evening. She was at the kitchen counter with her laptop, the post-work version of her that existed in the space between her last call and whatever she did with the hours that followed. Slightly looser, slightly less armored, hair pushed back rather than pulled carefully forward. "They called them a selling point," he said. "Of course they did," she said, without looking up. "People always come around to good ideas when they think they thought of them." "Is that what you do? With clients?" "It's what anyone does if they want things to actually happen." She closed her laptop partway. "You presented the financial case clearly?" "Exactly the way you described it. Cost per square foot per identity value." "And they understood it?" The lead partner started nodding around minute 12. After that, it was just everyone else catching up to him. Something in her face settled with the particular satisfaction of someone who doesn't often let themselves feel satisfaction. "Good," she said. "The building deserves it." Logan put his bag down and looked at her. "Can I ask you something?" "You're going to ask it regardless. Why do you care so much about that specific building?" She was quiet for a moment, her thumb running along the edge of her laptop. "I pitched the Mander Group on the branding for the Reed renovation," she said, "in 2018. It was going to be my biggest account at the time. I'd been working on the identity concept for weeks. The visual language, the naming strategy, how the building's history could become part of its market positioning." A pause. "They passed, went with a larger agency out of Seattle. And then the company folded. And then the company folded, and the building sat empty, and the branding the Seattle agency made never got used because there was nothing to brand." She opened her laptop again, a gesture that usually meant the conversation was ending, but her eyes didn't go back to the screen. "I still have the original concept, in a folder. I've looked at it probably 4 times in the last 4 years. Did you ever think about pitching the new ownership group? She looked at him with the expression she reserved for questions she considered naive. I don't do in-person pitches. The weight of what that meant settled between them. Logan didn't push it. He understood by now that there were things Victoria had organized her professional life around in order to function, and that the scaffolding holding those structures up was not as secure as she presented it. Pushing too hard on any one beam could bring down more than she was prepared to deal with. For what it's worth, he said, the new ownership group has bad branding. Their current agency made them look like a mid-range hotel chain. Victoria's mouth did the thing where it almost became something. I know, she said. I've seen it. He went to make dinner, and she stayed at the counter with her laptop, and neither of them said anything else about the Reed building or what she'd lost 4 years ago or the folder she'd opened 4 times and not acted on. But he thought about it afterward, while the water boiled and Maisie set the table with the focused ceremony she brought to household tasks, and he thought about all the things Victoria Sterling had put in folders rather than done. It was Dana who mentioned the conference first. She dropped the invitation on Logan's desk on a Tuesday morning in early November. A printed card, heavy stock, the kind of event that communicated its own importance through the weight of its materials. The Northwest Design and Leadership Forum. 2 days in December, held at the Reyes Center downtown. Attendance by invitation only across architecture, interior design, branding, creative strategy, and publishing. Major names, real money in the room. The firm has 2 tickets, Dana said. I'm sending you because you're leading the Reed project and because the ownership group's finance partner is going to be there. This is a relationship maintenance opportunity. And the other ticket? I was going to take it myself, but I have a conflict. She sat in the chair across from his desk. You should bring someone who can hold an intelligent conversation about creative branding. The forum is cross-disciplinary. Your value there isn't just as an architect. It's in who you're associated with. Logan didn't say anything, but something moved in the back of his mind. Any ideas? Dana asked. I'll figure it out, he said. He sat with it for 3 days before he said anything to Victoria. He turned it over carefully, the way you turn something over when you know the argument for it is good, but the reception might be complicated. On a Thursday night, he waited until Maisie was in bed and Victoria had come out of her office, and he said, I want to tell you about something, and I want you to hear the whole thing before you respond. She was standing at the coffee maker. She turned and looked at him with the expression that meant she had already decided to be skeptical. I have an invitation to the Northwest Design and Leadership Forum, he said. December, the Reyes Center. I have a second ticket that's mine to allocate. The silence that followed was the kind that has sound in it. No, she said. You haven't heard the whole thing. I heard the part where you want me to attend a public event with major clients and industry people and publishing executives in a large room where I cannot control who sees me or from what angle. She turned back to the coffee maker. No. The Reed ownership group will be there. The new group, the one currently thinking about branding. She was quiet. The folder, he said. The concept you built in 2018 that never got used. This would be a room full of exactly the people who could decide whether it gets used. Logan. She said his name in the flat, final way that meant she was closing a door. Victoria. I don't do events. You went to a client dinner 2 weeks ago. That was a controlled situation, a private restaurant, a table of 4, no cameras, no crowd. I'll be there, he said, and then stopped, because he wasn't sure what he'd meant by that exactly, or whether it was the right thing to say. She turned around. Her hair was down. She'd let it go loose at some point during the day, and it was partly across her face the way it usually ended up, but less deliberately than usual, and she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. What does that mean? She asked. It means I'm not going to manage you or position you or make it about anything except the work. It means if you want to leave, we leave. It means you won't be walking into it alone. That's not the problem, she said. The problem is walking into it at all. I know. She didn't say anything for a moment. The coffee maker finished its cycle. She poured a cup and held it in both hands and looked at the far wall the way she looked at things when she was working something out. I'll think about it, she said. He didn't celebrate that. He'd learned enough about her to know that I'll think about it from Victoria Sterling was not a soft yes. It was a genuine deliberation that could go either direction, and that pushing further would collapse it toward no. He just said, okay, and went to get his own coffee, and they sat at the table for an hour working on separate things, not talking, the comfortable parallel quiet they'd developed over the past month. But when he glanced at her at some point, her profile, the lamplight on her face, the way she chewed the end of her stylus when she was thinking, he saw that she wasn't looking at her screen. She was looking at nothing, working through something that lived somewhere else. She said yes 4 days later. She said it at 6 in the morning before he'd had coffee, leaving a note on the counter next to the coffee maker because apparently that was how major decisions got communicated in this apartment. The note said, "Form, I'll go, but you handle the tickets and the logistics and you don't mention it again until the day of." Below that, in smaller writing, "Also, we're out of the good coffee. Your shelf, not mine." Logan read it twice. He bought more coffee. He didn't mention the form. The 2 weeks between the note and the event were their own kind of complicated. Something had changed in the register of their interactions. Not dramatically, but perceptibly, like a frequency had shifted slightly. Victoria was more present. She joined them for dinner more often without needing the implicit offering of it, just appearing at the table like it was where she intended to be. She started asking Maisie about school, with genuine questions rather than polite ones. She and Logan talked in the evenings about work, about Portland, about the gap between what cities could be and what they actually were, about the specific loneliness of founding something, a company, a life in a new place, and carrying the weight of its early days entirely in your own hands. And Logan, who had spent 2 years carefully not paying close attention to anyone in that particular way, was paying close attention and was trying not to examine what that meant too directly. He was doing a decent job of it mostly until the Friday before the conference. He'd come home late, a contractor issue on the Reed site that had run 4 hours over, and Maisie was already in bed and the apartment was quiet. Victoria was on the couch with her laptop, which had become genuinely unusual because she'd migrated from the armchair to the couch over the past weeks, which was closer to the kitchen table, which was closer to where he usually sat. He hadn't said anything about the migration. He had noticed it. He dropped onto the other end of the couch and said, "I need to tell you something about the form that I probably should have told you before." She looked up. "What?" "Your ex is going to be there. Marcus Hale. He's consulting for one of the investment groups now, apparently. Dana mentioned it today and I realized I should have checked sooner." The change in her face was rapid and then controlled, a flinch, genuine and involuntary, and then the wall coming up. He watched the sequence in about 2 seconds. "How do you know what Marcus looks like?" she said very carefully. "I don't. Dana mentioned the name when she was going through the attendee list for me. I looked him up." Victoria closed her laptop. She was quiet for a moment with her hands flat on the cover. "It doesn't change anything," she said. It was the voice she used when she was deciding something was true by saying it. "It might," Logan said. "I want you to be prepared for it, rather than blindsided. I know how to be in the same room as someone I used to know." "I know you do." A pause. "I also know there's a difference between being in the same room and being in a public room where he can perform to an audience." She looked at him sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means the guy who left after 14 months because you needed him too much. That kind of person, when they're in a public setting with the person they left, sometimes they need to manage the narrative. Make sure everyone around them understands the relationship on their terms." It was blunt. He'd said it more directly than he'd intended, and he saw it land in her face. The recognition of something she'd been aware of somewhere beneath the surface, confirmed out loud. "That's a very specific read of someone you've never met," she said. "I've met the type," Logan said, "and I'm not trying to scare you off going. I'm trying to make sure you walk in there with your eyes open." She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that he thought she might be done with the conversation. "The last time I was in the same room as Marcus," she said, "was at an industry dinner about 8 months after he left. Someone introduced him to a new contact, and he spent the introduction talking about my accident. What happened, the recovery, how difficult it had been. Not for me. The narrative was about how difficult it had been for him." She said this with a flatness that was worse than anger. "He cried. In public, about what I went through, And everyone in the room looked at me with that look, and I was standing there trying to decide whether to say anything and realizing that anything I said would just become more of his story. Logan said nothing. "So I left," she said. "I left the dinner and I went home and I spent the next 6 months building a system where I didn't have to be in rooms like that anymore. And it's worked," Logan said. "It's worked. And it's also cost you things. The Reed pitch, the conference. How many other rooms have you not been in?" She stood up. He thought she was going to walk away. To the office, where she could close the door and convert the feeling into work, which was what she did with most things that got too close. But she didn't walk to the office. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to him, looking out at the city. "I think about it sometimes," she said. "How different everything would be if I'd just been able to stay in the rooms. There are partnerships I didn't make, clients I never pitched, a version of my company that doesn't exist because I wasn't in the room when it could have become real." "You still built something remarkable." "I built something despite," she said. "I don't want to build despite anymore. I want to build because." He didn't have an answer to that. It was the most honest thing she'd said out loud about herself in the 6 weeks he'd known her, and it landed with the weight of something that had been held in a long time. "Then come to the forum," he said quietly. "Not because Marcus will be there. Come because the Reed concept you built in 2018 deserves to be in the room." She didn't respond. She stood at the window for a while longer, and then she went to bed without another word. The morning of the conference arrived cold and bright, a rare Portland December day, where the sky had gone hard blue and everything was edged in clarity. Logan was up at 6:30. Maisie was staying with Dana's family, an arrangement that had been made with the careful logistics of single parenthood, and the apartment had a different quality without her in it. Quieter in the wrong way. He was in the kitchen when he heard Victoria's door open. She came down the hallway in a way he hadn't seen before, slowly, like she was measuring each step. She was dressed well, a dark jacket and trousers, hair down, and swept to the left in the way she wore it publicly. She stopped at the edge of the kitchen and looked at him, and he could see the controlled steadiness in her face that was the product of effort rather than ease. "I need about 5 minutes," she said. "Take 10, he said. "There's coffee." She poured a cup and stood at the counter and didn't talk, and he sat at the table and didn't push it, and the 10 minutes passed in the kind of quiet that isn't empty but is full of everything two people aren't saying because they both understand the moment requires something other than words. In the elevator on the way down, she looked at their reflections in the brushed copper walls, both of them standing side by side, slightly distorted and golden. And she said, without turning, "If I need to leave, then we leave," he said. "No questions, no pressure, no 5 more minutes. You say the word, and we're out." She nodded once. The elevator reached the lobby. The doorman held the door, and the cold air hit them both at the same moment, and Portland opened up in front of them under that hard blue sky, and Victoria Sterling walked out of her building into it like she was stepping onto a stage she'd been standing at the edge of for years. Logan walked beside her. The Reyes Center was a 15-minute drive. By the time they arrived, the morning session was just beginning and the lobby was full. The concentrated, deliberate energy of an industry event where everyone is there to be noticed by the right people in the right way. Logan felt it, the social architecture of the room, and he saw Victoria feel it too. Saw her absorb the crowd and make the micro adjustments she always made. The slight angling, the hair, the contained posture. He didn't comment on any of it. He got them both coffee from the registration table and handed her a cup and said, "Ownership Group's finance partner is at the 3rd table on the left. His name is Garrett Ewan. He's the one who finally agreed to the arched entrances." "I remember," she said. "You told me about him. He knows the building better than the other partners. If anyone's going to be interested in the branding concept, it's him." She looked at the room. He watched her identifying routes and angles, mapping the space the way she mapped every space. Then she looked at the 3rd table on the left, where Garrett Ewan was talking to 2 other men with the engaged, leaning-in energy of someone who liked ideas. "He looks like he's been in a room like this 100 times, she said. "He has, but he's not tired of them yet, that's the difference." She considered this. She was working something out internally. He could tell by the stillness. And then she squared her shoulders in a way that wasn't performance, just decision. "All right," she said. "Introduce me." They crossed the room. Logan made the introduction with clean efficiency. No oversell, just Victoria Sterling, Sterling Creative Branding. She has a concept I think you'd want to hear about. Garrett Ewan turned with the sharpness of someone who registered names and what they meant, and his eyes went to Victoria's face with the brief involuntary recognition that everyone had. Victoria held his gaze directly, her chin level, and said, "You bought a building with 3 arched entrances and your current agency is making it look like a hotel chain. I'd like to talk to you about what it could look like instead." Garrett Ewan blinked. Then he smiled, a genuine one, the kind that meant she'd said something he hadn't expected from the direction it came from. "All right," he said. "I'm listening." Logan stepped back half a step, giving her the floor, and watched Victoria Sterling do the thing she was best at, not hiding it, not managing it, just being the most compelling person in the conversation. She was precise. She was confident. And for a solid 12 minutes, she didn't adjust her hair once. It was going well enough that Logan let himself exhale. He should have known that was exactly when things would turn. He heard the voice before he saw the face, a particular timbre, carrying easily over the room noise with the ease of someone who'd trained himself to be heard in crowds. He turned, and at the edge of the room, near the far entrance, was a man Logan had only seen in a 4-year-old headshot online, Marcus Hale. Taller than expected, the easy-groomed confidence of someone who had never been seriously tested, and he was already scanning the room with the focused social efficiency of a person who was looking for something specific. Logan looked at Victoria, who hadn't seen him yet. She was mid-sentence with Garrett Ewan, and the conversation had momentum, and she was in it fully, and Logan made the quiet calculation of whether to say something and decided the answer was no. The room was large enough. Maybe it stayed that way. It didn't stay that way. Marcus Hale found what he was scanning for, and the thing he was scanning for was Victoria. Logan saw the moment it happened, the recognition, and then the particular expression that settled onto Marcus's face, which was not quite surprise and not quite pleasure, but something more complicated and more deliberate. He started moving through the room toward them with the casual confidence of someone who had decided how this moment was going to go before it happened. Logan moved closer to Victoria, not dramatically, just enough to change the geometry of who was standing next to whom, and said quietly, "He's coming." Victoria stopped mid-sentence. She didn't turn. She took one breath, precise and controlled, and Logan saw the decision happen in real time, the moment she chose how to meet what was coming. She turned around. Marcus Hale arrived with his hands slightly open, the body language of someone initiating a friendly encounter, and said, "Victoria." He said it with warmth and familiarity, the tone of a man who had decided they were on good terms and that this decision was final. "I heard you were coming to this. I wasn't sure I believed it." "Marcus," she said. Her voice was level. His eyes moved briefly and then deliberately back to the scar. And Logan, standing at an angle behind her, watched the move and felt something shift in his stomach. "You look well," Marcus said, with a specific inflection that took the phrase and bent it into something else entirely. Something that said, "All things considered, given everything, look at you managing." Victoria said nothing for a moment. Logan saw her jaw tighten, just slightly. "Marcus, this is Logan Carter," she said. "He's leading the Reed Building renovation." Marcus turned to Logan with the swift appraisal of someone who was recalculating and said, "Reed? The Harker Street building?" He shook hands, firm and brief. "I had a stake in that building once, actually, through the Mander Group." "I know," Logan said pleasantly. "I went through the ownership history thoroughly." Something flicked across Marcus's face. "Then you know the renovation we had planned was quite ambitious," he said. "Unfortunately, the capital environment at the time—" "It's a beautiful building," Logan said. "It's going to be remarkable when it's done." The conversation had the surface texture of professional exchange, and underneath it was something else entirely, and all three of them knew it. Marcus turned back to Victoria with the ease of someone who had been in enough rooms to know how to redirect. "I've been following Sterling Creative," he said. "Your growth has been impressive, though I've heard you've been keeping a lower profile than the company deserves." "I keep the profile that works for the company," Victoria said. "Of course. I just think, he paused, letting the pause do something. People in this industry respond to presence, you know? The clients at this level, they want to see who they're working with. It can be a limitation, not being in the room. It was carefully said. Not a direct attack, something that could be defended as friendly concern if challenged, but aimed precisely at the thing she'd told Logan in her own words, the thing she was afraid of, and delivered in a voice warm enough to be overheard as supportive. Logan looked at Victoria. She was looking at Marcus with an expression that had gone very, very still. Not the stillness of someone shutting down, the stillness of someone deciding. "I'm in the room now," she said. Marcus smiled. "You are," he agreed, and the smile said, "For now, let's see how long that lasts." "And I'm mid-conversation with Garrett Ewan about a branding concept for the Reed Project," she said, her voice taking on an edge that wasn't loudness, but was something harder than volume. "So if you'll excuse us." She turned back to Garrett Ewan, who had been watching the exchange with the focused attention of a man who had processed it fully, and she said, "I was telling you about the original concept for the building's visual identity, the entrance arches as the primary motif. Here, let me show you." She opened her phone. She brought up the folder she had told Logan she'd opened 4 times in 4 years and never acted on, and she showed Garrett Ewan the work. Logan did not look at Marcus Hale, though he could feel the man still standing nearby, recalibrating. He looked at Victoria, at the way she held the phone steady, at the way she wasn't adjusting her hair, at the way she was showing a stranger 4 years of held-back work with the steadiness of someone who had decided it was time. Garrett Ewan leaned in to look at the screen, and his expression shifted from polite attention to genuine interest, and he said, "This is actually... Where has this been?" "In a folder," Victoria said. Waiting for the right room, Garrett Ewan asked for a formal meeting before the morning session ended. Not a maybe, not a let's stay in touch. An actual meeting, scheduled on his phone before he walked away to take a call, penciled in for the following Thursday at Sterling Creative's office. He'd looked at the concept on Victoria's phone for 11 minutes, asked 4 specific questions, and by the end of it, his expression had the quality of someone who had been looking for something without knowing what it was and had just found it in an unexpected place. Victoria watched him walk away and then stood very still for a moment, like her body needed a second to catch up to what had just happened. Logan was beside her. He didn't say anything immediately. He'd learned that she needed room to land in her own way, that rushing to acknowledge things before she'd processed them had a way of collapsing the experience into something smaller than it was. "Thursday," she said, finally. "Thursday," he confirmed. She looked down at her phone at the concept still open on the screen, the arched entrance motif, the visual language she'd built in 2018 and put in a folder and taken out 4 times in 4 years. Her thumb moved to close the app, then stopped. "I wasn't sure it was still good," she said quietly. "I kept opening it and thinking maybe it had aged badly. Maybe I was just attached to it because of everything around it." "It's still good," Logan said. "Garrett Ewan's phone calendar is the evidence." She closed the app. "I need some air," she said, in the voice she used when she was containing something larger than she wanted visible in a public room. They found a side corridor off the main lobby, quieter, the noise of the event muffled behind glass doors. She leaned against the wall and exhaled, and it was the first fully unguarded breath he'd seen her take all morning. He stood across from her, giving her the space, not filling it. "He looked at the scar," she said. "Ewan." "For about a second and a half," Logan said. Then he looked at the work. "I know. I saw it happen." She pressed her fingertips against the wall behind her. "That's the thing people don't understand, because I can always see it. The half second, the slight shift in focus. Most people can't control it. I don't blame them for it, but I see everyone. That must be exhausting. It used to be worse." She paused. "When it first happened, after the accident, every single interaction started with that half second, and I used to count them. I had a stretch in the second year where I counted everyone, kept a number in my head. How high did it get? I stopped counting at 800 and something." She said it without drama, just fact, and it hit him harder than drama would have. At some point, you have to stop counting things you can't change. Marcus Hale had not reappeared in their immediate vicinity after Victoria redirected the conversation with Garrett Ewan, but Logan had tracked him peripherally through the rest of the morning with the attention of someone who doesn't trust a quiet flank. Marcus had moved through the room with the ease of a man who was performing ease, shaking hands, leaning into conversations, and twice that Logan counted, had looked across the room toward Victoria with an expression that was harder to name. Not hostility, something more territorial than that. The look of a person who had organized a story about someone else and was unsettled to find the story not holding. "He's going to come back," Logan said, "before the day is out." Victoria didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "Probably. The afternoon session has a panel discussion. Open room, less structured than this morning. He'll have more room to operate." "I know how Marcus operates," she said with a tiredness that was not defeat, but something older than that. "He's not malicious. That's what makes it hard. He genuinely believes the version of events where he was supportive and I was limited, and when you believe your own story that completely, it comes out as concern, which is almost worse than if it were just cruelty." Logan thought about that. "Because cruelty you can dismiss," he said. "Because concern you have to argue with," she said. "And you can't win the argument without sounding like you're being unfair to someone who is trying." She pushed off the wall, straightening. "He'll try to be kind today. That's what I need to be ready for. Not an attack, kindness." The afternoon sessions panel was on creative leadership and brand identity, and it pulled a full room, maybe 200 people in tiered seating around a central floor where 5 panelists sat in a loose arc. Logan and Victoria took seats toward the middle center section, which put them in the body of the crowd rather than the edges. He noticed she'd chosen that placement herself, without him suggesting it. The panel ran well for the first 40 minutes. Victoria was listening with the concentrated stillness she brought to things she found genuinely interesting, occasionally typing something on her phone, notes, ideas, the processing she did in text because some part of her thinking happened better in writing. Logan was watching the room as much as the panel, which was how he saw it when Marcus settled into a seat 3 rows behind them and 2 to the right. He didn't tell Victoria. He didn't need to. She had likely already tracked it. The moderator opened the floor to questions around the 45-minute mark, and the room did what rooms do. The pause, the uncertainty, and then 3 hands going up at once. The moderator took them in order. Standard questions, good ones, the kind that panels expect. Logan was listening with half his attention while the other half stayed on the room's temperature. The third question came from a man near the front who asked about the intersection of personal narrative and brand identity, whether a founder's personal story ever became a liability and how a company was perceived. It was a fair question, an interesting one. The panel engaged with it directly, and one panelist, a branding consultant out of Seattle, gave an answer about authenticity versus oversharing, about the difference between strategic vulnerability and narrative that overwhelmed the work itself. And then Marcus Hale raised his hand. The moderator nodded to him. Marcus stood, which not everyone did for questions, and he did it with the ease of someone who had calculated that standing would give him more presence. "I want to build on that," he said, pitched to Carrie. "I think there's a specific challenge when the founder's personal circumstances become visually unavoidable. When there's a physical element to someone's story that people respond to before they respond to the work. In those cases, is there an argument that the brand is actually strengthened by keeping the founder less visible, using the work itself as the face rather than the person?" It was crafted. Logan had to give him that. It was precisely crafted, targeted enough that anyone who knew would understand it, abstract enough that anyone who didn't would take it as a general point about branding strategy. The panel nodded thoughtfully. The moderator looked interested, and 200 people in the room had no idea a specific person was being discussed. Victoria was very still beside him. One of the panelists began to answer. Logan didn't hear it because he was watching Victoria's profile, watching her sit with the question in the room, the question about her, spoken in public by someone who had once been inside her life, and feeling the particular quality of her stillness that was different from her usual stillness. This one had something coiled in it. "You okay?" he said quietly. "No," she said, equally quiet, "but I'm deciding what to do about it." "You don't have to do anything." "I know I don't have to." Her hand was on her knee, not gripping, just resting. He He could see her thinking, the way she worked things through, not emotionally in the moment, but structurally, as if she was looking at the architecture of what was in front of her and deciding where the load bore. The panelist finished the answer. The moderator was moving to take another question, and Victoria raised her hand. The moderator pointed to her. She stood. "I want to respond to the previous question," she said, and her voice was clear enough to reach the back of the room. "Because I think the framing was slightly off." The room focused. 200 people, the panel, the moderator. Logan did not move. The premise of the question assumed that a founder's physical presence is a variable in whether their brand is strong or limited, she said. But a brand's strength comes from the clarity and consistency of what it stands for, not from how visible or invisible the person behind it is. The idea that keeping a founder less visible protects a brand is only true if the founder's presence is treated as a problem to be managed rather than an asset to be understood. She paused, just a beat. If you're building the brand around the absence of the person, you've already told the market something is being hidden, and markets don't trust hidden things. The room was quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something has shifted. One of the panelists leaned forward. "That's an interesting counter-argument. Are you speaking from experience?" "Yes," Victoria said. "I'm Victoria Sterling. I run Sterling Creative Branding out of Portland, and I spent about 3 years making myself less visible because I believed that my presence was a liability." She didn't gesture to her face. She didn't need to. The room understood. "What I found was that it didn't protect the brand. It capped it. Every piece of work we did had a ceiling because the person behind it was operating from a position of managed absence, and clients at a certain level can feel that. They don't always know what they're feeling, but they feel it." The panelist nodded slowly. "And what changed that?" "I got in the room," she said. "I'm in the room right now." She sat down. The silence lasted about 3 full seconds, which in a room that size is a long time. Then the moderator said, "I think we can all agree that was the most direct answer we've gotten today," and there was a release of breath that moved through the audience like a wave, some people laughing, a few starting to applaud before they caught themselves because it wasn't quite that kind of moment. Logan was looking at Victoria. She was looking straight ahead at the panel, her posture exactly the same as it had been before she stood, controlled, contained, but her left hand had found the armrest between their seats, and her fingers were pressed against it with a tension she probably didn't know she was showing. He put his hand over hers briefly and didn't say anything. She didn't move her hand away. He took his back after a moment, and they sat through the end of the session, and when it was over and the room broke apart into the noise of 100 side conversations starting at once, neither of them moved immediately. "That was," he started. "Don't," she said. "Not yet. I need a minute where it's not analyzed." "Okay." They sat in the emptying room for that minute. Then she said, "Where's Marcus?" Logan looked. "He left during the applause." She nodded once. She picked up her phone and looked at it, and then looked around the room at the people who were still filing out, and a few of them glanced toward her with the glance of people who had registered her face, not from the scar, or not only from the scar, but because she was the woman who'd just said something they were going to think about later. "I want to get coffee," she said, "and I want to talk to the woman on the panel, the one from the Seattle agency. Not about Marcus, about the work." "Then let's do that," Logan said. They did. The conversation with the Seattle panelist ran 40 minutes and covered brand architecture, client trust building, and the specific challenge of creative companies whose identity was closely tied to a single founder's vision. It was a good conversation. Substantive, genuinely mutual, the kind that doesn't happen often enough at events that are usually about performing rather than connecting. Victoria was fully present for all of it, and Logan watched the Seattle panelist track her with the focused attention of someone who recognized she was talking to a peer, and he thought, "This is what she's been keeping in a folder." They drove home in the early evening, the city going dark around them, and Maisie wasn't there when they got back because she was still at Dana's. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been in weeks, just the two of them, the particular atmosphere of a long shared day still sitting in the air. Victoria dropped her bag by the door and went directly to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of water, which was not something she'd done, accounting for him that way, including him in the small domestic automatic gestures. She handed him one without comment. You didn't tell me Marcus was going to ask a question, she said. I didn't know he was going to. But you knew he'd do something. I suspected. He leaned against the counter. How are you actually doing? She thought about it, which he appreciated. The fact that she was answering honestly rather than reflexively. Tired, she said. And something else that I don't have a word for yet. Like something shifted? Like something's been shifted for a while, and today I finally looked at it directly. She turned the glass in her hand. When Marcus asked that question, when I was sitting there and I knew what it was, who it was aimed at, I had about 30 seconds where I was going to let it go. Just sit there and absorb it, and let the panel answer and tell myself I was being the bigger person. What changed? I thought about the folder, she said, all the rooms I haven't been in, and I thought, if I walk out of this room today having absorbed that question without answering it, I'm going to put this day in a folder too, and I have too many folders. Logan was quiet for a moment. You know it's not going to fix everything, he said, one afternoon in a room. I know that. He's not going to stop having the version of events where he was supportive. I know that too. She set her glass down. I wasn't doing it to fix him or change his story. I was doing it to stop letting his story be the one in the room when I'm standing right there. She looked at Logan with the directness she reserved for things she'd thought through completely. Does that make sense? Yes, he said. Completely. She nodded slowly. The apartment settled around them, the hum of the city outside, the particular quietness of the space they'd been sharing for nearly 2 months now. He thought about what the apartment had been before. The way she'd moved through it alone, every room mapped for safe angles, the light under the office door until 2 in the morning, the folded towels for guests who never came because she didn't have guests, the extra cereal bought without announcing it. He thought about all of that, and then looked at her now, standing in her own kitchen, handing someone else a glass of water without thinking about it. I'm going to take the meeting with Garrett Ewan, she said. I know. In person, at the office. I assumed. My COO is going to have questions. Your COO has worked for you for 3 years and thinks you're remarkable. She'll handle it. Victoria looked at him for a moment with an expression he was coming to know. Not the guarded version, not the armor, just the actual face underneath all of it, tired and sharp and real. You've been very patient, she said, with all of this. I haven't been patient, he said. I've just been here. That's what patience is, she said. He looked at her and she looked at him, and the space between them was different than it had been at the beginning of the day, different than it had been a month ago. And both of them were aware of it, and neither of them knew quite what to do with that awareness yet. I should call Maisie, he said. She'll want to hear about the lizard in the radiator, Victoria said. He laughed. Actually laughed. Not the polite version. Gerald has been in her head for weeks. She told me on Thursday that she's decided a person's character can be assessed by how they respond to an unexpected animal in their vicinity. A beat. She said you responded well. When was she testing me? She didn't say. The almost smile that had become a real one, finally, in the weeks since they'd moved in. She also said that I passed. When did she test you? Apparently the evening I came out for dinner and there was a moth on the kitchen ceiling. She was watching to see what I did. What did you do? I found a glass and a piece of paper and put it outside. She paused. She seemed satisfied. Logan shook his head, something warm moving through his chest. She's been running assessments this whole time. She's 6. She's trying to figure out if the people around her are trustworthy. Victoria said it matter-of-factly, and he heard underneath it what she didn't say, that she understood that process from the inside, the careful cataloging of who was safe and who wasn't. He called Maisie. She was fine, happy, had eaten 2 pieces of pizza and was watching something with Petra. She has the hamster here, Dad, Gerald II, not the school one, and would be ready in the morning. He told her he'd pick her up at 9. She said goodnight and hung up with the efficiency of a child who had somewhere better to be. He set his phone down. Victoria was at the window, looking at the city the way she often did in the evenings. Not performing at it, just looking, like it was something she was still learning to be comfortable being part of. What you said today, he said from the kitchen. In the panel. I said not to. I know you said not to analyze it. I'm not analyzing it. He came to stand near the window, not beside her, just nearby. I just want to say that I've watched you hold a lot of things at a distance for a long time. And today you stopped doing that for a few minutes, and it was. He paused because he wanted to get the word right. It was something to see. She didn't say anything for a moment. The city blinked below them, indifferent and bright. I was terrified, she said. I know. My hands were shaking when I sat back down. I know that too. You put your hand over mine. Yes. She turned to look at him, and he was close enough now that he could see her clearly in the window light, the left side of her face unguarded, the scar visible in part of the whole of her, not a separate thing to be managed, but just her face. The face of someone who had been through something and kept going, and he had stopped seeing it as something apart from her so long ago that he couldn't have named exactly when it had happened. I noticed, she said quietly. I figured. She looked at him for a long moment, and in her expression was something that had been building across the weeks and conversations and late-night work sessions and shared dinners and Maisie's assessments and the folder she'd finally opened. Something that was not yet named, but was clearly present and looking for the right moment. This was not quite that moment. They were both too tired, and the day had already asked enough of them. But it was close. She turned back to the window. He stayed where he was, near enough that the distance between them was nothing that couldn't be closed. The Thursday meeting, she said, with Garrett Ewan. Will you look over the presentation before then? Yes. I'm going to rebuild the original concept from scratch. Keep the architecture, but update the visual language for where the project is now. I'll have the current site drawings for you by tomorrow. Good. She paused. Logan. Yeah? Thank you. For today. She said it simply, the way she said things when she meant them without qualification. All of it. I didn't do anything, he said. You were there. I was just in the same room. She turned to look at him one more time, and something in the gray of her eyes said she understood that being in the same room consistently without conditions was not nothing, that it was in fact the thing, the whole thing. Go to sleep, she said. You look terrible. Long day, he said. Good night, Logan. Good night, Victoria. He went to bed. Down the hall, the light under her office door stayed off. It had been off more often than on lately, and he'd noticed that too. The slow reclaiming of her own hours, the choosing of rest over the relentless work that had been her way of staying inside something manageable when the world outside felt like too much. He hadn't commented on it. Some changes you just watch happen and trust that they know their own pace. He lay in the dark listening to the city and thought about the folder she'd opened, the arched entrances she'd held on to for 4 years, and Garrett Ewan's calendar with Thursday at 2 o'clock now on it, and the way her hand had been still under his for a moment before he'd taken it back. He thought about Maisie, safe and asleep 2 miles away, and the system she'd apparently been running for weeks, the careful observed assessment of everyone in her world, and the fact that she'd found both of them trustworthy. He thought about the way Victoria had said the strongest thing isn't what you build to protect yourself, except she hadn't said that out loud. He'd just understood it from everything else she'd said. Outside, Portland was cold and clear, the same hard December sky that had started the day. And somewhere in the city, the Reed Building stood on Harker Street, with its 3 original arched entrances intact, waiting for someone to tell its story right. He fell asleep thinking about what got built when people finally stopped building walls and started building something meant to last. The Thursday meeting with Garrett Ewan ran 2 hours and 40 minutes, which was an hour and 40 minutes longer than Victoria had scheduled it for. She came home that evening with her coat still on and her laptop bag over her shoulder, and walked directly to the kitchen and stood at the counter in silence for a moment. And Logan, who had learned to read the specific frequencies of her silences, waited. He wants a full brand partnership, she said. Not just the Reed Building, the entire Ewan development portfolio, 7 properties across the Pacific Northwest. He wants Sterling Creative as the primary identity agency for all of them. Logan set down the knife he'd been using to cut vegetables. Victoria. I know. I know what it is. She put her bag down, finally took off her coat. Her hands weren't completely steady. He said the reason he wanted to expand the scope was that he could tell the work came from someone who actually understood what buildings mean, not just what they look like, what they mean to the people who are going to use them. She paused. He said that came through in the way I talked about it, in person. Logan looked at her. She was processing it with the caution of someone who'd been disappointed enough times not to fully believe good things until they were in writing and signed, and he understood that completely. And he also understood that this was real, and she knew it was real, and the caution was just how she moved toward things that mattered. In person, he repeated. In person, she confirmed. He said he'd had the branding concept presented to him twice before by other agencies, and it had been fine, and he'd declined both times. He said this time was different because... She stopped. Because I was in the room, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word, just a fraction. And she pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a second the way people do when they're trying to keep something from spilling. Logan walked around the counter. He didn't reach for her. He just stood nearby, close enough that she wasn't alone in the moment, but not so close that he was crowding it. It's a good thing, he said. I know it's a good thing. You can cry about a good thing. I'm not crying, she said, very firmly, with eyes that were clearly deciding whether or not to cooperate with that statement. Okay. She exhaled. I'm just aware that if I'd come to that forum 2 years ago, or 3, or 4, if I'd just been in rooms, this partnership might have existed years earlier, and I don't know how to hold that without also holding the version where it just happened now, and now is what I have. He understood exactly what she meant. The grief of time that went differently than it could have, and the choice you make about whether that grief cancels the thing you're standing in front of. Now is what you have, he said. The other thing is a different story. It's not yours. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she did the thing she almost never did. She leaned forward and put her forehead briefly against his shoulder. Not a hug, just contact, just the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding themselves upright for a very long time. He stayed still. He let her have the moment. She straightened after a few seconds and stepped back, composure back in place, the version she wore like armor, but lighter than it used to be, like she'd taken a few plates off. Dinner smells like it's going to burn, she said. It's not going to burn. The onions are past translucent. He went back to the stove. She sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop, and Maisie came in from her room with a drawing she wanted to show them both. And the apartment folded itself around all three of them the way it had learned to do over the past 2 months. Making room, finding the shape that fit. The Garrett Ewan contract was signed 3 weeks later. Victoria's COO, a sharp and deeply capable woman named Renata, who had worked for her for 3 years without ever seeing her face, came to Portland for the signing meeting. Victoria had told Logan about it the night before with the specific tightness in her voice that meant she was braced for something. She knows about the accident, Victoria said. She knows I had significant injuries. She just hasn't seen me in 3 years. What do you think will happen when she does? I don't know. That's the problem. What do you want to happen? She thought about it. I want it to be nothing, she said. I want her to look at me and it to be just a face, my face, the face of the person she's been working with. It might be exactly that. It might not. Either way, Logan said, you'll know, and you'll have the information, which is better than not having it. She had gone quiet the way she did when she was turning something over and couldn't argue with the conclusion. Renata arrived at the office the next morning, and Victoria was there, face fully visible, the left side of her not turned to any wall. Logan heard about it that evening. He hadn't been there. It wasn't his moment to be there. When Victoria came home and sat at the table and said simply, she looked at me for about 2 seconds, and then she looked at the contract and said, I've been waiting 3 years to sign something this big with you, and that was it. That was it, Logan said. That was it. She was quiet for a moment. I thought about all the meetings we'd had on video with her camera on and mine off, all the times I told myself the work was enough and presence was optional. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. She said something afterward. She said she'd always wondered why I kept my camera off, and she'd decided a long time ago it wasn't her business. But she was glad I'd stopped. "So is Garrett Ewan," Logan said, "and his 7 buildings." Victoria looked at him. "And Maisie?" "Maisie assessed you and found you trustworthy. High bar." "She used a moth," Victoria said. "That's actually a fair metric." January came with rain, which in Portland meant it had arrived home. The Reed building renovation moved into its active construction phase, and Logan was on site 3 days a week, managing the contractor logistics and the particular chaos of turning a framework into something real. The arched entrances were being restored, the original stonework cleaned and repointed, the proportions preserved exactly. And on the first day the scaffolding came down from the front face, he stood on the opposite sidewalk and looked at them and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing going the way it should. He took a photo and sent it to Victoria. She replied in 30 seconds. Finally. One word. He stared at it for a moment, standing on a wet Portland sidewalk with concrete dust on his jacket, and thought that was probably the best review the building would ever get. The month settled into a rhythm, not the careful parallel track rhythm of the early weeks, where they'd existed in the same space without exactly sharing it. Something more lived in than that, more honest. Victoria came to dinner without being asked. She helped Maisie with a school project on Oregon geography, with the serious dedication of someone who had decided that if she was going to help, she was going to do it properly, which resulted in a scale model of the Columbia River Gorge that was frankly more detailed than any 6-year-old's homework required. Maisie got full marks and told her teacher that her friend had helped, which apparently prompted the teacher to ask who the friend was. And Maisie had said she runs a company and she knows a lot about rivers. Logan had found out about this via a delighted email from the teacher and had told Victoria over dinner, and Victoria had gone quiet in the way she went quiet when something got past her walls before she'd thought to raise them. "She called me her friend," she said. "She tells everyone about you," Logan said. "Petra knows your name. The substitute who was there for Gerald the Lizard incident apparently also knows your name. I'm a talking point." "You're her person," he said. "She doesn't have a lot of people. The ones she has, she talks about." Victoria looked at her plate for a moment. "I didn't have many people when I was her age," she said quietly. "I moved a lot too, actually. My parents worked internationally, different cities, different schools. I was good at doing without." "That's not the same as not wanting it." "No," she said. "It's not." Maisie, who had been following the conversation with her peripheral attention while apparently focused on her food, said without looking up, "I think you're good at doing without things so long that you forget you want them." Victoria looked at her. "That's true of Dad too," Maisie continued. "He was doing without for a long time." "He thinks I didn't notice." "Maisie," Logan said. "I'm just saying," she said, with the unassailable calm of a child who has correctly identified something and sees no reason to pretend otherwise. Logan looked at the ceiling. Victoria was looking at Maisie with the expression she wore when his daughter said something that broke through her defenses simply by being too accurate to deflect. "You're going to be either very successful or very annoying when you grow up," Victoria told her. "Probably both," Maisie said. "Yes," Victoria agreed. "Probably both." The thing between Logan and Victoria did not announce itself. There was no single moment where it became a different thing than it had been. It was more like a photograph developing slowly in a darkroom, the shapes becoming clearer until one day you looked at it and realized it had been that image all along. You just hadn't been able to see it yet. He was aware of it. He was aware of it on a Tuesday in late January when she came and sat beside him on the couch, not across from him, not in the armchair, while he was reviewing site drawings, and leaned slightly in his direction while she read something on her own laptop, close enough that he could have bridged the distance without moving much. He was aware of it on the morning she made coffee with the pour-over setup, and poured a cup for him first without asking, setting it where he usually sat before she poured her own. He was aware of it in the evenings when Maisie was in bed, and the apartment was quiet, and Victoria talked to him differently than she talked to anyone else. Not without walls exactly, but with the kind of walls that have windows in them. He was also aware of the reasons to be careful. He was living in her home. His daughter had attached herself to this woman. The power balance of the arrangement was not neutral, and he was old enough to know that feelings developed in proximity could be mistaken for feelings that would survive distance. He didn't want to move towards something that was actually just the warmth of shared space, and he didn't want to be wrong about what he was seeing in her. He was still working through that calculation on a Saturday afternoon in February when Victoria came out of her office at 3 in the afternoon, which was unusual, and said, "I need to show you something." She turned her laptop around. On the screen was a real estate listing, a 3-bedroom apartment, 6 blocks from the penthouse, good building, the kind of place that came up rarely in the Pearl District. Bright, reasonable layout, a window seat in the 2nd bedroom that Maisie would claim within 4 minutes of seeing it. "It came up this morning," Victoria said. "I saw it, and I thought, the timing is right. The Reed project has given you stability. Maisie's settled at Riverton. You've been here 3 months." She said it evenly, giving him information, not pushing him toward anything. Logan looked at the listing. He looked at the window seat. He thought about the This Is Temporary calendar he'd stopped updating 6 weeks in. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "Because you need a permanent place," she said, "and because you're not going to find it if you're not looking." A pause. "And because if I don't say it, we're both going to keep not saying it, and I think it's better to say it." He looked at her. "What are we not saying?" She was very still for a moment, the way she got when she was deciding how fully to commit to something. "That this has become something," she said. "What started as an arrangement, and I don't know what the right thing to do with that is. I've never—" She stopped and started again. "I've spent 4 years making sure nothing became something. I got very good at it, and I'm not good at this part. I don't know how to do this part." "What part?" he asked, though he knew. "The part where something is happening and I'm not sure whether to let it or to protect us both from the possibility that it doesn't work, and you end up resenting the apartment and I end up—" She stopped. "I'm not good at being the person in the situation." "What situation?" "The one where someone is looking at me the way you look at me," she said plainly, the way she said things when she'd decided directness was less dangerous than circumspection. "And I'm not sure I trust it. Not because of you specifically, because I don't have a good history of trusting it." He understood. 4 years, and before the 4 years, 14 months of someone who had stayed out of obligation and left when the obligation felt like enough. Understanding being looked at with care versus understanding whether the care was real and durable, those were different skills, and she'd had reason to distrust the second one. "I'm not Marcus," he said. "I know you're not Marcus." "I'm not here because something happened to you," he said. "I'm here because of who you are when you're arguing about arched entrances. When you tell Maisie that every place has rules but the one rule that matters is being competent. When you help her build a scale model of a river gorge at 10 o'clock at night with more dedication than the project requires." He paused. "I'm here because of how you move through your own life. That's what I see when I look at you." She was quiet, looking at him. "And I could be wrong about what it is," he said. "I've been wrong before. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm just telling you what it is from where I'm standing." A long silence. Outside the window, Portland was doing the February thing where it looked like it might be clearing and then didn't. "The apartment listing is real," she said finally. "You should look at it. You should have your own space." "Okay. Not because I want you gone," she said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know. I want you to have something that's yours because you deserve that, and Maisie deserves that." She looked at the listing on her screen. "And I want to know what we are when the arrangement isn't the context anymore, when we're not housemates being careful around each other. I want to know what it is when there's actual space between us and we still—" She stopped. "Choose it," he said quietly. "Yes," she said. "That." He looked at the apartment that weekend. Maisie came with him, and she found the window seat within 3 minutes, which was faster than he'd estimated, and stood in it with her arms out and said, "This is my reading corner. This is decided." "We haven't signed anything," Logan said. "The window has decided," Maisie said. He looked at the 2nd bedroom with its window and the living room with its good light and the kitchen that was smaller than Victoria's but wholly its own, and he felt both things at once, the rightness of having somewhere that was theirs and the specific ache of a chapter closing into something new. They signed the lease 2 weeks later, March 1st, move-in date. Victoria helped them pack. She arrived on the last Saturday of February with boxes and tape and the efficient energy of someone who had decided to be useful rather than feel anything about it until later. Maisie directed the whole operation with the authority of someone who had moved enough times to have developed strong opinions about box labeling. Logan watched Victoria carefully wrapping Maisie's drawings, the ones from the walls of the guest room, including the crayon picture of the two of them in front of the building that had been on the Sterling Creative Office whiteboard for weeks, and felt the particular texture of a moment that was both an ending and not. "You can keep that one," Maisie told Victoria, pointing to the drawing. "I know," Victoria said. "I am." Maisie nodded with satisfaction and went back to directing the box labeling. Logan looked at Victoria from across the room. She was holding the drawing and looking at it, and she must have felt him looking because she glanced up, and her expression was the one she had now. Not guarded, not performing, just her face, the whole of it. 6 blocks, he said. 6 blocks. She agreed. The move happened in one day. Maisie's room was set up first because that was non-negotiable. The window seat claimed with Mr. Hopscotch immediately positioned in the corner of it. Victoria stayed for 3 hours, assembling furniture, drinking bad coffee from a bodega around the corner because the good kitchen supplies were still in boxes, arguing with Maisie about the optimal placement of the bookshelf, which was an argument Victoria won on the grounds of natural light optimization, and Maisie accepted because she understood the logic even if she didn't want to. By 7 in the evening, the apartment was recognizable as a place people lived in. Not finished, not the kind of finished that takes months, but inhabited. The right kind of started. Victoria stood at the door to leave and Maisie hugged her with the full-body sincerity of a child who doesn't hug half-heartedly, and Victoria held on a beat longer than Logan expected. "Come for dinner Thursday," Maisie said into her shoulder. "I'll try," Victoria said. "That means yes," Maisie told her. "Dad says that too, and it always means yes." Victoria looked at Logan over Maisie's head with an expression that was part resignation and part something warmer than that. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she said, and left. She came Thursday, and the Thursday after, and the one after that. It was not a gradual, careful thing. It had the pace of 2 people who had already done the gradual, careful part, and were now simply present with each other without the architecture of an arrangement holding the context for them. In March, she attended the opening walkthrough of the Reed Building's restored ground floor. The arched entrances lit from inside, the original stonework clean, the space finally beginning to look like what it had always had the potential to be. Garrett UN was there. The ownership group was there. Dana was there. Victoria walked through the space with Logan and pointed at things with the unself-conscious directness of someone who knew the building like it belonged to her in some important way, because she'd been carrying its visual identity for years before anyone else had. Garrett Ewan introduced her to his partners as the lead branding architect on the full portfolio project, and Victoria stood there in a room full of people and shook hands and made eye contact and answered questions, and not once did she adjust her hair. Logan stood nearby and watched it and thought, there it is. That's the version that was always there. He told her that in the car on the way back. "What version?" she asked. "The one that was in the folder," he said. "The whole time." She looked at the city going past the window. "It's not a better version," she said. It's the same one. I just stopped arguing with it." "That's the whole work," he said. "That's all it ever is." She turned to look at him. Outside, Portland was spring now, tentative and green, the kind of March afternoon that felt like the city was testing whether it was allowed to be pleasant. "I'm not arguing with this either," she said quietly. He knew what she meant. He reached across and took her hand, not briefly this time, and she let him, and they drove through the city like that, not performing anything, not making it a thing, just choosing it, quietly, without announcement. There is something that happens when a person stops letting fear make their decisions for them. It doesn't look like the movies. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive in a single moment with music swelling underneath it. It looks like Victoria Sterling showing up to a parent-teacher conference with Logan because Maisie had put both their names on the emergency contact form without telling either of them, and Victoria sitting in the small chair in the kindergarten classroom, looking at the teacher with the focused seriousness she brought to everything, asking questions about curriculum and early reading development that the teacher clearly did not expect. It looks like Logan finishing the Read project in November and standing at the entrance on Harker Street at 7 in the morning, just standing there looking at the building before the crew arrived, and texting Victoria one photo and 2 words. "We're done." She called him immediately. "Go inside," she said. "I want to hear what it sounds like in there when it's empty." He walked through the front entrance, the arched one, the original, the one that had been worth fighting for. And the lobby was marble and silence and old bones made new, and he put the phone to his ear and just let her hear it. "Good," she said after a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Good." It looks like Maisie, at age 7, telling her second-grade class that she had a dad who built things and a person at home who made sure things looked like what they actually were, and that those 2 jobs were actually the same job, which her teacher wrote down because it was worth writing down. It looks like hard things that don't resolve cleanly. It looks like Logan having a difficult phone call with Elena about school schedules while Victoria is in the next room and feeling the awkwardness of those 2 parts of his life existing in the same space. It looks like Victoria's parents visiting Portland in October and her mother meeting Logan and Maisie for the first time with the particular scrutiny of a woman who had opinions about everything and the confidence to express them all. And the dinner being tense in places and good in others, and imperfect in the way that all real things are imperfect. It looks like Victoria and Logan having an actual argument in February. Their first real one, about her work hours and his frustration at her disappearing into the office for 4 days straight around a contract deadline, and saying things with too much edge, and then having to come back from them, which is the part nobody tells you about, the coming back. The choice to come back. They came back. That's the thing about people who have both learned to do without. When they decide not to do without anymore, they understand the weight of what they're choosing. They don't take it lightly. They also don't hold it so carefully that they can't actually live inside it. It is 14 months after a rainy Tuesday in Portland when Logan Carter stood on a curb with a condemned apartment building at his back and his daughter's hand in his, and no idea what was going to happen next. The apartment 6 blocks from the Sterling penthouse has a window seat where Maisie reads every evening, and a kitchen that smells like whatever Logan is making, and a bookshelf positioned exactly where the light hits it best, per the design specifications of a woman who takes these things seriously. Mr. Hopscotch is in the window seat. There is a drawing on the refrigerator of 3 figures in front of a building with arched entrances, done in better crayon technique than the original, because the artist has had a 1.5 years of practice and takes improvement seriously. Victoria's penthouse is 6 blocks away and also, in every way that matters, right here. The Reed building opened its first commercial tenants last month. The ground floor retail, 3 businesses through 3 arched entrances, has been written about twice in Portland architecture publications, once for the restoration and once for the branding. The branding piece ran Victoria's photograph alongside the copy. Full face, no careful angle. The caption said, "Victoria Sterling, Sterling Creative Branding." Nothing else. Nothing else was needed. She had sent Logan the piece with a message that said only, "Look." He had looked. He had looked at her face in the photograph, at the scar that was part of the whole of her, at the directness of how she was looking at the camera, at the person who had been in the folder for years and was now unmistakably in the room. And he had thought about the night she told him she wanted to build, because instead of despite, and he had thought, there it is. That's what because looks like. He'd sent back, "I'm looking." She'd replied, "Stop being sentimental." He'd replied, "Absolutely not." Here is what this story is actually about. If you need it said plainly, it is not about a man who rescued a woman from her fear. Logan Carter did not rescue Victoria Sterling. Victoria Sterling was not waiting to be rescued. She was waiting for a room where nobody flinched, where the half-second glance happened and moved on, where she wasn't someone's managed narrative or someone's object of well-meaning pity. She found that room, and she built the rest herself. It is not about a woman who was saved by love from the damage done to her. The damage was real. The accident was real. 14 months with a man who stayed long enough to believe his own generosity and left when it stopped benefiting him. That was real too, and it left marks that don't disappear because someone else comes along and looks at you kindly. Victoria worked through that slowly and imperfectly, and not always successfully, and there were days well into the second year of what she and Logan built together, where she would go quiet in a way that he recognized, and she would have to find her way back to the present on her own terms. He let her. That's the thing. That's the actual thing. The people who stay, the ones who matter, are not the ones who arrive with a plan for how to fix you. They're the ones who are simply, stubbornly, genuinely there, who don't need you to perform recovery or explain your fear or justify the parts of yourself that are harder to love, who move into the room and make coffee and notice that you bought extra cereal and don't make it a speech. Logan Carter wasn't trying to change Victoria Sterling's life. He was trying to get his daughter fed and into bed in a strange city on a rainy Tuesday, and this woman opened her door and let them in, and what happened after was built from that. From the smallest possible beginning, from necessity becoming familiarity, becoming something that neither of them had a clean word for until they didn't need one. Maisie had a word for it. She called it home. She said it on a Thursday evening in April when all three of them were in the kitchen. Victoria at the counter, Logan at the stove, Maisie at the table with homework she was ignoring, and she looked up from the page and said it without preamble, apparently to no one in particular. This is what home is. Neither adult said anything for a moment. What made you think of that? Logan asked. She shrugged with the profound disinterest of a child who has stated an obvious fact and finds the adult need to discuss it baffling. I was just thinking about it, she said, because it's true. Victoria looked at Logan across the kitchen island, and he looked back at her. And there was nothing to say because everything was already true, and the room they were standing in knew it. This is what it looks like when a person stops letting fear choose the rooms they enter. When someone who has learned to be invisible decides it's time to be seen. When a man who's been carrying the weight of a life he's rebuilding finally lets someone help him carry it. Not because he asked, but because she decided he didn't have to ask. It is not a perfect story. It is not a smooth one. There are still mornings where Victoria stands at the window with her coffee and something moves across her face that Logan doesn't fully understand and knows better than to press. There are still nights when Logan second-guesses himself. The promotion, the move, the choice to stay in a temporary arrangement long after it stopped being temporary, and lies awake running the math on whether he's made the right calls. Maisie still has the dream sometimes, the one where she's in a school that isn't her school and doesn't know the rules. But she wakes up and she's in her room with the window seat and the view of a city she knows now, and Mr. Hopscotch in the corner, and that seems to be enough to send her back to sleep. What we carry from this, what any of this is worth saying out loud, is something like, the strongest thing you will ever do is stay in the room. Not the room where everything is easy and nobody looks at you wrong. The room where the thing you've been protecting yourself from is right there, and the people who've been watching you avoid it are watching to see what you do, and you could leave. You could leave very easily. You've had years of practice leaving, and you don't. You stay. You show them the work. You say, I was in a folder. I'm in the room now. That's all of it. That's every bit of it. Outside, Portland is doing what Portland does. He's being impossible and gray and occasionally, without warning, heartbreakingly beautiful. The Reed Building stands on Harker Street with its arched entrances open. 6 blocks north, a 6-year-old girl with her father's stubbornness and her own particular system for assessing whether people are trustworthy is learning to write in cursive and has opinions about it. A woman who spent 4 years making herself less visible runs a company that is now, undeniably, in every room it needs to be in. And a man who came to this city with a suitcase and a daughter and no backup plan is standing at a kitchen window on a Thursday evening, watching the sky go orange over the water, thinking that sometimes the things that break you open are also the things that let the light find somewhere new to go. He's not sure where he heard that. Maybe he thought it himself. Maybe someone told him a long time ago and he filed it away for when it was true. It's true now. That's enough.